Welcome to Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Jewelry Studio. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to make this beautiful banded and overwrapped bangle bracelet. This is made from sterling silver, copper, and turquoise. Just beautiful. A link to all the materials used in this project is in the video description.
Get our email newsletter for beading news, sale announcements, new product announcements, and more. Link is in the description below.
So the first step for this bracelet is just measuring out the wire. And we'll measure the sterling first. This is how the sterling looks when it comes in a 5-foot roll. So I'm just going to grab my wire straightener tool. This is a really handy tool for when you want to straighten wire. Making a banded bracelet, you need to get the wire really straight. So this is an important part of the process. So find the end of your wire. And I just start with a section and work backward. So I'm going to start with the end, like 8 inches. And you just run this over your wire as many times as you need to get it straight. And you can change direction with it a little bit and kind of manipulate it. It's looking a lot better. And then I'm going to go further down my roll here and do the same thing. And just by kind of arcing the wire straightener in a certain direction, you can manipulate the wire straighter. So I'm going to be cutting 13 inches of this sterling wire. Find about the 13-inch mark. If in doubt, cut slightly more. Okay, so I've got one piece. Now I need 2 pieces. Okay, now that we've got 2 nice 13-inch pieces of the 18-gauge sterling wire, we're going to go to the 20-gauge copper wire, which is going to make up the middle band of the bracelet. And we're going to cut a slightly smaller piece. We don't need quite as much copper going through the middle. So I'm going to cut about maybe 11.5 inches of that. So now we have our 3 pieces of wire that are going to make up the bracelet. So the next step, we're going to center them so there's equal amounts kind of on both sides of the center of the bracelet. I'm going to go ahead and put these sterling pieces together with the ends meeting there. And then I'll put the copper so there's kind of an equal amount on either side. And then I'll take my ruler and kind of find center. It's a 13-inch piece of wire on that sterling. So 6.5 will be center, which is right about there. So I'm just going to remember this spot by picking those wires up by my thumb and forefingers. And we're going to center the copper between those 2 sterling pieces. Okay, so now we're going to kind of gauge by the copper wire. So the center of the bracelet is right where my thumb and forefinger is. And the center bead is here. So for now, I'm going to just take a little piece of painter's tape so it doesn't leave any residue, but it will keep my wire together. And I'm just going to snip off a little piece, and I'm just going to mark the center with that wire by folding it over, and I'll remember that that's center. Then I'm going to go ahead and band 1/2 of the bracelet. And so by banding, I mean we're making the wires flat, and then we band around with a smaller wire to keep it together. Okay, so I'm going to snip off another couple of pieces of painter's tape here. They don't need to be very big, so that'll be actually 2 pieces. We'll band it in a couple of places with the tape. And I'm just going to kind of set that off to the side so it's ready for me when I need it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out how far to the side my first band is going to be. So this centerpiece is about 2.5 inches long. And it's got some wrapping here, so it's a little bit longer than that with the sterling wire. So about 3.5 inches from center, I'm just going to put a piece of tape, and that's just to keep that wire flat and together, just like that. And it's going to move around a little bit. That's okay, but you just want to keep the correct wires in the correct order. So you've got silver, copper, silver, and make sure that they stay flat. Then I'm going to go ahead and make 6 of the preformed bands. So I'm going to use some 24-gauge copper for that, and I just need a few inches. Then I'm going to go ahead and create my first band. Okay. So to make our preformed bands, we're going to use a special banding tool. It's got a little groove here, and a little piece that goes into the groove. And this one makes the perfect size for the wire to band around this other heavier wire. So I just put it in there, squeeze it together, and that gives me this perfect little kind of hairpin curve that I'm going to put around the wire. Now I can really put it around the wire anywhere right now because this is going to be able to slide. So I'm just worried about getting it between the two pieces of tape. And you'll need to make 5 more preformed bands. So the first thing that I'm going to do is kind of grab the ends and pull them tight, opposite directions, like that. And then I'm going to grab the long tail with my thumb and forefinger to hold that steady. And I'm going to grab another plier and I'm going to wrap. And I'm going to be really nice and tight right against each other. And it just needs to go around a couple times with a short tail. And then I'm going to snip the short tail off in the back. I've now created the back of my piece. Wherever you snip the tails off ends up being the back. And then I'll take a chain nose plier and just squish that down gently. And then I'm going to flip it around and I'm going to kind of hold those wraps and I'm going to wrap in the other direction. So I'll grab my plier, really nice and tight right against your other wraps, ending on the back where you've already snipped off the original piece. And you can make as many wraps as you want. 5 or 6 is usually good for a banded bracelet. And then I'm just going to squish those together. I can use my fingernails like this, or I can come in with my chain nose pliers or flat nose pliers and squish them together. And then I'm going to gently flatten them, but not hard, just gently, because I want that to be able to slide. See how it moves? All right, because I'm going to position it later. So now I'm going to make a second band on the outside of this outermost piece of tape. So we're going to do that same process again. Okay, now you can see that I've made a second band on the outermost side from this outermost piece of tape. So I have the end banded, so I can start working on the design that I'm going to be making around the beads here. So I'm going to take this center piece of tape off. I was only using that kind of as a gauge, and we need those wires free. I'm going to slide that band here, and I want about 5 inches behind this inside band here. And then I'm going to just kind of grab it where the band is, and I'm going to pull one piece of sterling wire out this way and one piece of sterling out the other way. And I want it to be almost flat with the copper sticking straight up. We're going to be threading the beads on the 20 gauge copper wire and wrapping around with the 18 gauge sterling wire. So the first thing we're going to do is make this first little decorative element here, and there's no bead there. It's just a couple of wraps to give a little extra kick to the piece. So I'm just going to take my sterling wire and use my finger as a little guide to make a little curve up and around like that. Almost like there was a bead there, but there is not. And I'm going to come back underneath the copper. Just like that. And I'll use my dipped chain nose pliers to flatten that out. Now, the dip is actually tool magic. It's another really cool tool that I wanted to show you. Looks like this. And you dip your pliers in that and let them dry, and it makes a nice coating on your pliers to keep you from marking up your metal. So I'm going to flatten that out with my dipped pliers and manipulate it around. And I can do that safely without worrying about ruining my wire. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to come around right over the top of the first one that I did, and then back under the copper wire. And then I'll kind of squeeze those together with the dipped pliers. And so we have our first little element here, just like that. Well, the next thing we're going to do is start threading on the beads. So I'm going to take the 6 millimeter turquoise bead here and thread that onto the copper. This turquoise is so pretty. I just love this. Make sure and check out our introduction to turquoise video. You'll really learn a lot about it. And so now that I've got one bead on there, I'm going to go ahead and just move this wire up and around the bead all the way so it kind of curves around the bead. And we got to go under the other wire on the other side. And I'm going to kind of clamp that all down together and bring it back around under the copper. And then kind of squeeze that together a little bit. And there we have the first bead on the bracelet. To finish that bead off, I'm going to take the other side and wrap it right around, right above the last wrap. And then I'll squeeze that together with the pliers. There we go. Now that we have all of the beads wrapped onto the bracelet, let's do the opposite side. So we're going to curve the wire just like we did on this end inward toward the copper. So we're just making a little bump out. And then I'm going to grab my dipped pliers, and at the bottom of that bump out, I'm going to straighten it so it's pretty parallel with the copper. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just a little bump out. And they'll be a little uneven because the wire where it comes is uneven, but that's okay. That's part of the design. And I will grab my dipped pliers and move those so they're all kind of straight and flat together. Go ahead and tape this end like we taped this end, so the wire will stay nice and flat together to band to this side. So I'm going to grab a little square of the painter's tape, and one band will go right here, so a little bit down from that, not too far. I'm going to go ahead and tape it, and just make sure you're holding them nice and tight together before you do that. And there we go. And then I'll take a preformed starter band and put it over the wire above the tape. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull those wires in opposite directions, nice and tight as I can get them, right near the tape where it's really close together. Then I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to kind of hold the long tail with another pair of pliers. I'm going to wrap the short tail one time around. You want to make sure that where your tails are ending up on the bands is the back on both ends of the bracelet. And then I'll flip that around, and I'll hold the short tail while I wrap the long tail a bit. And we'll go around a couple of times on that. Okay, I've got my wraps nice and tight. I'm going to push them together, and I'm going to flatten them just a little bit. Snip off those tails on the back. There's one. There's two. And I always like to snug those up. Just make sure they're nice and tight against the bracelet. There's a little space down here between the wires, but when we slide the band up all the way where we want it to be, it snugs all those wires into place. And then I'm going to take my dipped pliers, and I'm really going to add some pressure and flatten those in place so it stays where you want it. And then I'm going to flip the bracelet around and make sure that this side is squished together and flattened in place. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is make another band on the outside of the piece of tape on this new end of the bracelet, and slip that over your wires, pull them in opposite directions real tight, and then you can wrap either tail. It doesn't matter which one you wrap first, as long as you wrap them both. So we're going to wrap that one around. I'm actually using my hands to wrap, get it nice and tight, but I'm going to use a plier kind of at the end just to make sure it really is tight. And then I'll flip that around, and I'll wrap the other tail a couple of times. I'm happy with that. And then we're going to cut the tails off. Make sure it doesn't fly up into your eyes. And then use a plier to snug in those tails. And we're going to push them together, but leave the wraps a little loose for right now. Okay. So we've got our bracelet, the majority of it finished. We're just going to curve it around gently. You're going to have to curve the top a little bit. So you want this to fit the average wrist. Now, make it fit you. If you have a smaller or larger wrist, measure it right on your wrist so you know what kind of curvature you need. So for this one, I'm going to really bend these ends in a bit and curve it around this way. So the part that I have taped up is going to curve in a little bit. That looks really good. So I'm pretty happy with that shaping. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove this tape that we used from the banding. We don't need that anymore. Okay, now the tape is off. We're going to figure out where the bands need to be. So you want them far enough apart so they're adding support to your wire, but close enough together so they're not going to be right at the end of your bracelet. And then we're going to add a middle band where the tape was, right in the middle. And that's just going to keep the bracelet nice together and snug. Okay, now that we've got all 3 of the bands on either side completed, we're going to finish the bracelet. So you're just going to make sure that the curvature is right, and you need to leave space for your clasp. We've got this great little hook clasp that's going to go right in the middle. So to finish this, the first thing we're going to do is figure out where we want the bracelet to end, and we're leaving room for some wraps and a loop on either side and a clasp. Okay, right about here, I am going to clamp all 3 ends, and that's about, well, half an inch or so from that last band. And I'm going to grab the copper wire that's in the center here, and I'm going to pull it tight against my pliers, and I'm going to wrap that a couple of times. And we're wrapping around both of the silver wires, nice and tight. Then I'm going to go ahead and cut the tail, and then I'll tuck in the tail, make sure it's not pokey. All right, then I'm going to grab one of the wires, and we'll clamp all 3 wires again together with our dipped pliers right near that first wrap. And I'm going to pull it right against those copper wraps and wrap this one around a couple of times. Then I'm going to cut that tail, tuck it in, and then with the last wire, I'm going to make a little loop. So I'm going to leave just a little bit of space, a couple of millimeters for wraps here at this end. So I'm going to go ahead and bend the wire, make like a 90-degree bend, a couple of millimeters up from those wraps. And then I'm going to use my round nose plier to make a loop. You want it kind of in the middle of the plier. Needs to be a big enough loop for your clasp to go through. There we go. And then I'm just going to clamp that loop. And we're making a wire wrap loop at this point down to the other wraps. We're going to wrap that down. And then I'll go ahead and snip off that tail. And we'll tuck it in. Straighten that loop a little bit. That looks really good. Now we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the bracelet. Okay, now that you have loops on both ends, the last thing to do is attach the clasp. So we just grab a jump ring and open that up, put the clasp on, and put it on the end. Make sure that's nice and tight. And there you go. There is your beautiful wrapped bracelet. Isn't that pretty with the turquoise? I just love it. Thank you so much for being with us here today. I hope this helped. please make sure and like, share, and subscribe, and sign up for that email newsletter. That way you get the inside scoop on all the new information at Fire Mountain. Take care, and we'll see you next time.